Good evening, and I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Saco School Board for February 28th, 2024 at 5:06 p.m. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, item number 3 tonight, we do have the approval of the school board meeting minutes dated February 7th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Madam Mayor, I move we approve the school board meeting.
We need to, motion made by School Board Member Truman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member Preble.
Don't I have to make the motion first?
Yep, go ahead. Sorry.
I move we approve the school board meeting minutes dated February 7th, 2024.
Thank you.
Second.
I'll take a breath now. We can. School Board Member Preble, keep your second. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
School Board Member Roach?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion to approve the minutes passes 7-0. Item number 4, there were no adjustments to the agenda this evening. Item number 5, there were no correspondence. Item number 6, public session. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak, please step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and we have 3 minutes to speak. Okay, not seeing anyone recognized. We move on to item number 7, and that is the superintendent's report.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all after a good vacation week that we were able to have. And I know last month we had our meeting kind of a week early because of the vacation week piece that was coming up. I don't believe we've met since we had a challenging day here in Saco based off some community activities. But, one of the things I want to say is that anytime you have an event that disrupts the normal process of the school day, you try to reflect on the things that happened well, the things that you can improve upon, the relationships that you have with certain city departments and other schools. I've had a lot of time to talk with fire chief, police chief, headmaster Menard at TA, and at the end of it, I think that we are just super impressed by our ability as a community to handle a tough situation, the way that staff, admin responded to that, the way we were able to work our way through the events. Really impressed with our ability to communicate with the police department, fire department, and the chain of commands. The ability that we had to work with Thornton Academy and share some of our decision-making processes along the way, using technology and good correspondence. And then at the end of the day, the people who help make that the most seamless as possible is transportation staff and their ability to know where kids live, move without the city, adjust on the fly, share services between communities and police officers coming from all over the place. I think it really is when you can kind of decompress from that situation and you reflect on it and you say, yeah, there are all the things that we would like to do a little bit different that would help it. At the end of it, you say, well, you know what? Everybody worked really well together, and I think that's a testament to a lot of the strong relationships we have with our other department heads throughout the city and how we can keep people informed. And so while we certainly don't ever wish to go through those again, it's always a way to refine our practices and think about how we respond in the future. So a big thank you to all of those who helped work with our schools, protect our city, and get through the day. I think job well done by all. As you know, we're coming back from vacation week, and typically once you come back from vacation week in February, you're 6 weeks, 7 weeks till April vacation, and then you're a sprint to the end of the school year. Thought I'd kind of jinxed myself last time, but I didn't. Did not jinx myself with the snow day.
You were within just a couple inches. I'm just,
We were fun. All storms are within a couple of inches of going or not when you boil it down. But I don't know. I think if this weather is going to hold up like it is out there now, just rip the Band-Aid off and let's bring spring on, or bring us some more snow so that people can enjoy winter activities and rural Maine can, have their economy be okay based off snowmobiling, skiing, ice fishing, and those pieces. So typically as you get towards April vacation, then we can start locking in those end of the school year important dates as we start to firm up what the last day will be. It's a little too early for that yet. A lot of time being spent right now on just budget process, getting things ready for the 18th to present to the city council. Finance committee just met, and our budget review is looking like it will be May 7th at 3 o'clock for the finance committee here, just trying to coordinate everybody's schedule so there still could be a change to that, but looking for that to happen with a review tonight, more discussion on the 13th, presentation to the city council on the 18th, and then wait for those health insurance numbers to come in and hope for some positive news. Meg and I will be in Augusta again tomorrow as we continue to push for the building project to get over the line and follow. We're kind of working on those end of document types of needs with our hope, Meg, for March 28th, I believe it is, for the next straw poll is the target date, is the 28th. And again, each time we go to Augusta, we learn more about what other boxes need to be checked for us to move forward. Was corresponding with the attorneys today, and the city manager was involved about making sure those bond orders language is really tight and that's ready to go and to move forward. And then finally, for any of the school committee or city council, there are a lot of athletic events and community events that happen every single year. But if you can get yourself to a unified basketball game, those are really special events and good events for our students, communities. Kind of shows you what school and teamwork and everything's all about. And our next one is March 5th. So next Tuesday night, it's at 3:30 at SMS. But if you can get to one of those, I think that's our only home game left. Those are just special for the kids and for the community. So I encourage you to attend if you can. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Superintendent Ray? Okay. Moving on, that takes us to item number 8. School Board Chair Preble, do you have a report?
Nothing major this evening, but thank you.
Okay, item number 9, there is no staff reports. Takes us to item 10, and that is the board subcommittee minutes. Item A is the Policy and Personnel Committee meeting agenda, was 3/13/24 at 5:30. Item B, Finance and Infrastructure Committee next meeting, 2/28/24 at 4:30, which was today. And item C, Curriculum Committee next meeting, 2/26/24 at 4:30. Item 11, there is no old business. Item 12, under new business. Number A, we do have new hires. There is no motion needed for that. Item B is resignation. Is there a motion for the resignations?
Madam Mayor, I move we accept the resignation of Christy Gomez, pre-K special education teacher, effective April 9th, 2024.
Second.
Motion has been made by School Board Member Truman, second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion or comment? Okay, not seeing any. Roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
School Board Member Roach?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Madam Mayor,
Yep, a second motion.
I move we accept the retirement of Marco Lamoth, CK Burns teacher, effective at the end of the 2023-2024 school year.
Second.
Motion has been made by School Board Member Truman, second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion or comment on that item?
Just want to say thank you to Mr. Lamoth for all of his years. I don't know how many years he's been here, but it's been a hot minute, I'm sure. So thank you to him for going on, doing his thing at CK Burns all these years.
Okay, not seeing any other, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
School Board Member Roach?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Okay, that takes us to item C, and that is a school construction update.
So I briefly mentioned that during our superintendent's report, is that Meg and I are back in Augusta again tomorrow, working on the final items of, essentially you're submitting this huge document of requests. And part of the strategy we've been going through is trying to turn things into the DOE, meet with them, answer their questions about the documents, and then be like, okay, so what else needs to happen? And there's a list of things that we are working on. The big piece that Oak Point is working on right now that we'll be discussing tomorrow is, one, the overall budget, because the budget number has to be locked in for the state side before the state board can approve the state share of the project. And then, obviously, we are trying to work on the energy consumption of the current buildings and what is part of it that's required to say, here's your existing state and this is how much you're paying in oil, electricity, those types of things, and this is what you would look like in a new building, to make sure that items like the geothermal or the heat pump situation. Right now we're looking at this would be a geothermal heated building, which what that means for us in this situation is geothermal does cost more money than what they provide for an oil-based system, but we're working with efficiency grant that will bring that entire difference back to us from, say, the cost of what the oil system is to the geothermal, that would be repaid to cover the cost through the Inflation Reduction Act. There was a program there, and that's what we're working through now, because having the ability to use something like geothermal will give us the ability to heat and cool those buildings all year long. And that's going to be a pretty special thing, is to think about having those two buildings have cooling in there, and what that will do summer program, and what it will do academically for students is, the temperature is around 70 degrees all the time. That's a big difference. So those are some final things that we'll be putting over, making sure the bond language is in order. And then I suspect Meg and I will spend a day a week up in Augusta until the straw poll, until we're at the point where we would go on March 29th is the state construction meeting, which is 2 weeks before your state board meeting on April 10th. And that's the target we're looking to hit. And we're starting to feel pretty okay about that. Knock on wood. I don't want to jinx myself or ourselves for tomorrow.
And just to let you know, the city council did approve the special meeting on April 10th.
Awesome, thank you.
So we are all set for that on the council side. Any questions or comments on the construction? School Board Member Gale, then Roach.
Just following up on the bond piece of it, I guess kind of what are the next steps, and does DOE have any guidance or suggestions on having it one question versus two, or do they just leave that up to the locals?
That will be a local decision. The DOE is going to be only concerned about the one bond for their project. And so that's what they're going to be focused on. The others will be our decision, and really that will become, you know, we can, when we present the budget on the 18th, we could add that as the other joint item to have a little bit more discussion about that piece. Because ultimately that's your guys' decisions. You have heard my recommendations. You just have to weigh those pieces out of what you think will be best politically and best for the system. And, you know, I think that as we get to that vote with the state board, and you know that that's moving forward, and then you're really plastering those photos of what new schools are going to look like around the community, and knowing that we're going to be able to solve a problem at a rate that is so much different than what the other surrounding communities are dealing with. I think it's something that we've got to be able to talk about. I know that, you know, we know that the Scarborough situation, 160 million, failed. I was reading in the paper the other day, I don't remember what the paper for that covers Cape Elizabeth that you can get into the store, and they're talking about projects in the, you know, 110 to 150 million dollars for fixing all of their schools, and doing something to each and every building, and looking at our reality and thinking that we're going to move into possibly 2 brand new buildings that will impact the next 75 years of the educational system at a price that is probably 1/4 of what Scarborough faced, or hopefully in that, you know, in that ballpark. That I think that really needs to be something that we talk about, you know, of taking a situation that is a challenge for us and really doing a pretty decent job, I think, for the community in the long term. We will be looking at, and part of the work, some of the work that traded back and forth today between the attorneys, city council, city manager, was looking at current bond indebtedness, and then being able to figure out what it would look like with this piece and how that would impact, you know, your medium home price tax rate here. So I think that's really the next steps, and, you know, my hope is that we would have some of that information done prior to that 18th meeting in a ballpark, so that you guys, with the city council, can then have that conversation of, okay, which direction do we want to go, and what does this all look like?
I think that's great. I think we had a great conversation to kick it off, and I look forward to that on the 18th, just to kind of close the loop on that.
Because the city council will have to, that night of the 10th,
Yep,
that decision is final.
it's fine, yeah. Yep, okay, thank you.
School Board Member Roach?
Yeah, to follow up on the dual versus one bond question, Wyndham was successful with their $40 million local. Was that the same situation? Did they have that selection to make, or did that kind of stand alone?
So they had one question in Wyndham, but they also were dealing with one school. So I would say the difference in what their project is that they had a much larger local-only share, and I believe it went towards theater and some other upgrades that they were looking at for that building. And they made the choice because it was one project to have one question. Now, what I would, when I worked in Westbrook had a question when they built their new middle school that was like, here's the state school, and here's what you would pay if you wanted to add the theater on. So they had 2 questions. Again, I think that's just a local decision of how you guys want to run that process. I'll reach out to Sanford too, and see if I can get some history of what they put on their ballot question, because I think in the area, that would be the newest school that was state funded.
Was that just the high school, one school too, or was that
Well,
seventh and eighth?
they also rehabbed several of the other schools well, so they may have had a bunch of different questions because they were doing things at the middle school, they closed a couple of elementary schools. We'll see if we can get their packet of what they were dealing with here. And, you know, I think that if you were looking at, if we were not considering the second school in this, and we were only dealing with the 1 through 5 school and a state share that's going to be under 10%, I'd be sitting here saying, no, just one question on that only. To me, I just, for two reasons. One is I think that it's kind of two big decisions that the community's making. And then number two, because we're building on the same site and keeping those budgets and making that just very clear that there's no overlap in those budgets and that everything's budgeted for. I know that we asked Rob, we have a state budget template that we have to fill out for the DOE, and that we'll be filling one of those out identically for the local piece, just for clarity on the state side of things, because, you know, there's some shared infrastructure and things like that that we want to make sure it looks and appears very separate.
The other question is the top number, the bond amount that the state would offer. Does that get affected based on timing of our vote, June, versus if it somehow had to go to November, because of whatever cap is there for the whole state funding for that fiscal year?
So I think what they tend to do, and what my perception is they look at their cap, they know what slots are available, and they try to time things so that as items come off and things come on, there's, you know, that, no. Do I think that November messes with things? No. But I think that they're looking for, you know, one of the questions that we had for the construction committee for the site approval was, you guys were approved in November of 2020. Why are we here in, what was that, December or November of 23? Like, what's taking so long? Those types of pieces. And obviously, we talked about land and those challenges, but they want to move this along.
Any other questions or comments? School Board Member Truman?
I know this is probably already considered, but they're gonna cap us at a certain amount at the state, how much they bond. You know, the question is, what if prices go way up again like they did during the pandemic and everything was 3 or 4 times more than usual?
So again, once you'll set a budget, and you'll work really hard to stay within that. And when you think about, was it 10% contingency that's in that? You know, that's a pretty big number on a project like this. I do believe that there were some situations where there were some projects, and I would not speak 100% correctly, but I thought I heard that there were some projects that were put into play before the pandemic that did have to come back and make some budget adjustments because there's just nothing you could do. I think that we would hope in any situation that we're actually entering a situation where we may see some construction prices coming down versus going up. And that would be the ideal situation, is that you would get to there and then you'd be like, okay, we don't need to borrow everything we need to borrow. And that does happen on projects, but.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, next item, D, is a 25 budget presentation. Item number 1 is a budget presentation, and item 2, there is a memo in your packet as well.
So, we will start with the budget presentation piece and the overview, and this is where we'll work on tonight. You've seen the budget memo in preparation for the city council, and kind of the reason I do it 2 ways is that, gives people who have different styles of absorbing things, two different ways to kind of take in the budget and go from there. Just for those who are looking at pictures on there and say, like, how'd you choose those ones? Either I had them on my phone or they were easy grabs off Facebook. So that's how those get chosen. Like, how's there? What's the easy ones to grab? So as we start the budget overview, you try to think of the things that we've talked about a lot, and we talk about valuation, because we know that means so much in the funding formula. And one of the pieces is, we think about our current situation is that we know that through our review at the city council piece that we've got approximately $1.4 million more in state subsidy this year than we did in prior years, when essentially our student count stayed about the same, our ELL count stayed about the same, our free and reduced lunch rates went up a few percentage points. But the big piece was the city of Saco's valuation grew at 7%, and the state average grew at 8%. And so in this scenario, that's a great day for Saco, because if your growth and your valuation growth is staying under the state average, you're not going to be penalized. Now, as you move forward and you think about what comes in another year, I do start to think and get a little bit worried about that when we're preparing the budget for 2026, we know that our valuation is going to be $343 million more at a minimum. And I know that throughout the process, the budget process, we'll be talking, the city and the school department will have conversations about TIFs and TIF districts and some of those pieces about valuation of what needs to be done. But as the valuation is lower than the state, you get more subsidy. And so always something for us to watch as this tends to creep up in York County. If you go to the next slide, you'll see where Saco is compared to other communities in value in York County. And then just looking at the staggering fact that Saco, from 2020, you have 42% of your valuation has occurred. Now, that's pretty similar to others in York County. But such large valuation growth time over time again, if you really go in and you focus on the Secretary of State report on valuation, you'll see that York and Cumberland County consistently grow in their valuation more than the rest of the state of Maine. And so what happens to us in the future is important for you guys to think about, important for the city council to think about, as you think about development, businesses, TIFs, all of those pieces of not only the impact that it has on the municipal side, but the impact that it has on school subsidy, because they do go hand in hand. Yeah.
So you have 11%, that 353 million valuation increase. Is that a guesstimate, or is that coming from kind of city circles?
The 26?
The slide before, the 26 estimate.
So
instead of 7, it's 11.5%.
So when you go to what happens on the school side of things, is every January the Secretary of State releases what your new city valuation is, and then you take that number and you look at the 2 years prior and you create your 3-year average, and so that is the 3-year average increase that we know we're going to get. So that's a locked-in number. What I haven't done, Kevin, has looked at every single municipality in the state for 3 years and tried to calculate the state average on that piece, which could be done if you want to go through every single town. You could predict where you're going to be.
But you don't think the state average would be like 12%? It would be under, yeah.
I mean, what we've seen the last couple of years is that you're in that 6 to 8% range, and anyone that's typically in most situations. And you know, if someone said to me, why do you think Saco's was 7 this year versus, because you probably already had some higher home prices, haven't necessarily added large manufacturing type pieces, so that keeps that down a little bit. Probably are on the higher end of your TIF piece, which shelters some values, would be my guess. But again, if you have water, those communities seem to be having the greatest. The other piece that seems to be is when you look through and you look at service center communities, there's like, I think there was an article in the Press Herald, whether it was this weekend or the week before, where Lewiston is having major spikes in valuation increases as well. And you're seeing, we last year when Bill was mayor, we met with the mayor's coalition statewide, and you could see it coming as that service center communities and places like Rockland, Camden on the coast were having these major valuation increases that were, way more than anywhere else, which is going to be challenging because some of the service center or larger urban settings tend to have higher free and reduced lunch, more diversity. Those are some things that challenge us a little bit more. And then from the city side of things, you tend to be challenged a little bit more by emergency calls, those types of services that are needed. So yeah, that's a real number, Kevin. If we go to the next set of slides, this is what I shared at the city council. And this is how, when we had our joint meeting, of what makes up EPS. And I won't, unless you want me to, I won't go through 100% of that again. But again, what I would highlight is the fact that we had some pockets of, we look at on page 2 and we look at our disadvantaged students. That piece is essentially your free and reduced lunch rate, and you try to capture as much of that as you can, but that's a rate that has increased, and you're looking at a point where almost 3 out of every 10 children in our school department are in a disadvantaged category, and that has significant impacts on a community, kiddos, the needs of kids, and the offerings that we have to work on at school to make sure that we're meeting the needs there. And so as you follow through this formula that we've kind of already gone through, it goes back to, at the end of the day, the city of Saco pays for about 50% of the education on their own and receives 50% from the state. And we receive, again, looking at that $1.4 million more in subsidy, helps when we look at our expenditure side of the table. The other piece, the next piece that I'd want to draw your attention to would be the next slide, which is just for points of reference of cost per student in Southern Maine. And if you go one more slide, Meg, or a couple more slides, frozen up.
Is it going? Not this one. Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
If you look at the cost per student in Southern Maine, there are a couple of categories that we take out of this. One is vocational education. You're frozen, Meg.
It's all garbled up. It looks fine on here if it's any consolation. Okay,
Is
now it's better.
vocational education and debt service. Because one of the things that you would see is if you were comparing the debt service numbers, you put Sanford on there, and Sanford has so much money coming for new school construction from the state that it appears that you spend a whole lot more money than you actually do locally through the formula. Just like in a couple of years, when our building project hits the budget, someone's going to look through the spreadsheet on the state of Maine piece and say, why did Saco get $4 million extra dollars in EPS funding formula? What's going on down there? And really, it's the amount of money that's in your state construction runs through the formula. And so we take that tab out so that when you look at your core academic pieces, you will see that essentially the cost of education in Dayton per student is around $16,891, which is slightly above the state average. Now you would ask some questions here about, okay, so why is regular instruction so much higher in Saco than it is in another place? And the reason that it's higher is not that it's that much higher, it's just that because we pay tuition to Thornton Academy, that's a regular education expense versus if that was in a school department, many of those same things would be carried across all of the lines that are remaining. So it skews it a little bit here, but when you look at things like school administration or transportation, this gives you a good idea of what we spend here locally versus what others in the state spend. And, you know, we do this exercise so that for you guys here as a board or for the taxpayers at home, they can clearly see how we rate with, you know, there's about 20 schools in southern Maine of what the expenditures are. When we look at this year's budget and we look at, okay, so what's driving the costs of increase in this budget? It, at this point, is really about 4 items. So you have a budget that is 800 and something pages long with crayons, markers, desks, windows, cleaning supplies, staff, etc. And at the end of the day, you can look at 4 major categories of spending that shift our money. First one, we pay tuition 9 through 12, which is a little bit different than other communities do, and that has an increased cost to it. And that increase is $867,000 for next year. 5.6% was what it was this year. Yeah, we had like a 6 and a 5, and it typically cycles into 3 to 4% over a 10-year period. And so 867K is in tuition. Salaries and steps for our employees is almost $1.3 million. When you look at the FMLA payroll tax law that we are learning more and more about every single day, and we learned yesterday that if you have existing collective bargaining agreements in place, you may not have to pay this for those bargaining units until they reopen. So that number I might be able to bring down a little bit. Jason and I are thinking that that's a possibility that we're going to be able to decrease. And then you look at health insurance increases and changes. And while that's only $206,000, remember that as people come and go from the district, there are different plans that are put in place or things we did during negotiations that would change things. But when you look at a percent, we have 10% in there, Jason, and that was $37,000 a percent, I believe. $44,000 a percent. So there's $440,000 in there in a percentage increase. So, 2% brings 80-something thousand back to the table for us to have conversations about. When you look at, on the expenditure side of some of the things that I've recommended to you guys, is that even in this budget that hasn't increased expenditure-wise, well over $2 million, there has been a reduction of 2 classroom positions at SMS based on student enrollment, a recommendation to eliminate a technology coordinator at Young and Fairfield School. We have a reduction of contracted IEP coverage for state agency clients, and we'll be handling that in-house. Reduction of general fund summer school expenditures. We've been pretty lucky to, through ARP money and Title I allocation, we can cover that through grants that we've been able to obtain. We reduced capital expenditures by $150K in this budget because we had the bleachers in last year's budget, and we're taking that piece out. You know, we've looked at supplies in various departments and things like that. And then we have added 1.0 positions for facilities maintenance. That still only gives us 3 district-wide for facilities and maintenance, and I really hope that we can continue to look at the size of that, because I think it's very important for us to be planful of that facility staff as we move into new buildings, because the last thing that we can want to have happen in 4 years of opening new buildings saying, hey, what's happening here? Why aren't we keeping up on things? And you have to have staff to do that, or you're paying more in contracted services out. I think that when we look at considerations, Finance Committee, we had some conversations about capital improvements at SMS, the replacement of the modular building, and again, not looking for probably additional funds in the budget. I think we can look at carryover and an expense to offset that. Continued increase of out-of-district placements cost or alternative programming. Students that have those needs, those costs, and those facilities have rising costs, and tuition is something that we have to continue to make sure that we're programming for students locally. Looking at energy costs and fuel costs, really want to have a discussion this spring as we learn more about the new building, about whether we should be the owner of solar panels on the roof, whether we should lease those out and be part of that, be a lease, but how do we reduce some of our costs as we move forward, using more green energy for our buildings. It doesn't make a lot of sense now to make some of those changes based off the infrastructure we have. I'd like to make those based off the infrastructure we're going to, because I do think that, again, if you're looking at a geothermal system, you're not looking at a payment in natural gas and or oil. You're now looking at probably an electricity charge for the heat pumps and the running of those motors. And so having a better understanding of what we would need for solar capacity on that roof is an important piece. Making sure that we have equitable staff assignments based off student ratios throughout the district and where our staff is aligned. Just refinement of costs as we go through the project, and Finance Committee notices something, or we notice something in central office, or a principal, just continue to refine those pieces. Examining the staffing needs as we transition to new buildings is important, so that we're kind of looking at what the future holds and whether we have the right positions in the right place and what those counts will look like, because certainly there will be some efficiencies as we go from 4 different locations to 2. And then long-term, those operational costs and programming for pre-K in FY26 budget is something we've talked about, but needs to be, considerations, making sure we don't do something here that would hinder our ability to do something in the long term. When you look at the overall costs on the next page, your kind of cover sheet or revenue sheet, you're looking at a situation where you bring all of those categories that we have together. and you look at a percent change or an increase off expenditures. And again, when you think about positional counts in here, we're -3 on teaching side and +1 in the facilities staff. We're down, but yet you still have a difference of $2.7 million in expenditure increases. And when you go back, you can come up to 2.4 of it, 2.5 of it off 4 lines. So that makes it a little bit challenging because those are lines that you need to have in your budget. When you transition this to the revenue side of the piece and you look at the revenues that we have, Jason and I have gone through, and you look at your local share of EPS, your additional local, that's just kind of how the formula works, because in order to get the state money, a lot of times they're saying that locally you have to raise a little bit more, but you always here in this community raise additional local, so that number doesn't fluctuate as much. You look at Dayton regular ed students, and we're expecting that to be down about $30,000, and a lot of that's just class sizes in Dayton is smaller. We get some of the students, but you know, if they only have 17 in a classroom, the cut of that probably is going to be a bit smaller. You can see that our state share of EPS is up $1.44 million. That's a majority of it. As we've looked, our carryover over the last couple of years has been pretty good in the $800,000 range per year. We've got about $1.5 million in carryover funds now, and so based off where we are budget-wise, I think adding another $100,000 to a $400,000 carryover can make some sense in this scenario. We may have more conversations about that. And then when you see the last one, the undesignated fund capital, if we were to move forward with a building at SMS to solve that portable solution, that's where we would put a revenue. The reason it's decreased now is because we had put a revenue in that last year for the bleachers to match that expenditure. And since that's not there, you don't have the revenue or the expense in that. When you look at adult education costs, and you look at your total local to the tax levy, you're looking at $1.436 million, or 4.75% in the current state. It will be our job as a committee, as we review this piece and through the finance, to figure out, in conjunction with the city council, and you know, remembering we're one half of the equation and they're the other half of the equation tax-wise, to figure out what will work for us and what number will be something that can be acceptable to voters, essentially, being mindful that we also will be asking for a fairly large bond issue at this time in this budget to move forward. So trying to balance all three things that we know, tax rate, but as we sit today, the impact to taxpayers from the school side, percentage-wise, is 4.75%. I think we are a long ways of figuring out how that impacts your mill rate based off all the things that will happen on the city side, valuation, you know, their revenues that are coming in. But starting to have, you know, had some great conversations with the city manager, who guys are very fortunate to have. He's a very intelligent man and a good city manager. And just thinking about their side and ours and what might be that sweet spot for us. And so certainly would entertain any questions from this high-level overview. Again, looking to have Finance Committee meet hopefully on the 7th next week at 3, and then kind of bring some of those recommendations back to you guys on the 13th as we prepare to go to the City Council. And it may be at this point in time that we're not doing a whole lot until after that City Council meeting, but starting to get some direction from the board that if, you know, more or less needs to be adjusted, we start developing that plan that least impacts students in the classroom, and hoping that a health insurance number comes in really good, because sometimes that's an easy place. What I can tell you is that if we were looking to get that number of tax increase below or at 4%, you're looking at about another $250,000 in change that has to occur. And that can be done through a combination of reductions or in revenue. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the budget piece?
Madam Mayor, I have a couple questions. They're expenditure questions, so one of my questions was if there was a way we could get a spreadsheet breakdown of classroom sizes for SMS and maybe for any other schools if we have to reduce anything. I'd be curious what the classroom size for each grade level would be, things like that. And then I'd also like to, I've had some of parents reach out and ask about classroom supplies and things for each school, and I was kind of flipping through the budget, so I'd like some clarification around how much teachers have for each classroom, things like that. And I know that's more for the administration questions, but I'd like at some point a breakdown of that. I know I have a more condensed budget than others on the school board here, but it'd be nice to know, like, at each school what they have for, you know, SEL, music, art, STEM, things like that, libraries. So if you guys could point me in that direction, that'd be amazing. Thank you.
So just to answer your question, if you look at the budget memo, it does give you the projected enrollments and class size teachers in an easy form there. And during the budget review with principals, again, we're not a district that says, hey, you get $200 per classroom. We're one that says, put a request in, and let's evaluate the request, because a science classroom may need more than $200. You may have a piece of furniture that you need replaced in your classroom that would eat up that entire 200. So we try to evaluate those costs individually versus that blank, here's an allowance, go through it. Other pieces like take library books, for example, we use a figure, and I think off the top of my head it's $13 per student in that school, roughly, for library book replacements, some of those types of things.
Thank you. I look forward to that.
Any other questions or comments? School Board Member Roach?
So I brought a little bit of this up at the Finance Committee meeting, but for the whole group, there are positions that you struggle to fill throughout the year, and it could be a carryover from the prior year, but we budget for them, and that's test. So you have 3 positions that you have being dropped, and not to get into too specifics, and it could be settled through attrition and work out the classroom size and all that, but would there be a way to utilize reclass still, because it seems like we're really short on student support in those positions, where could some of these positions be reclassed while we're still saving because we're not budgeting for these empty positions that we are getting by with, and then we could, you know, that the head count would still be, the budget head count would still be less, but the head count itself would basically stay the same.
Sorry, I need to turn my mic on. I think for the classroom positions, again, looking at class size throughout the district and the data, and knowing that you have attrition that can take care of those pieces, so, you know, job loss is not there. There's a recommendation of a reduction of a position that someone's currently in, but that person would have rights to another open position or open positions in the district that we tend to have every year, so that job loss is not a problem. I think what becomes difficult, Kevin, is that you're mixing where we tend to have our openings is not sitting in the classification of instruction and teacher, but you tend to have those in that support staff kind of revolving door positions of ed techs tend to come and go and change a lot. You know, hopefully we'll have some good contract negotiations which will allow us to fill those positions so we can meet the needs of students that have those, and get some more, kind of permanency in those positions. But it's very tough, if we're looking at a reduction, it's just so tough in a budget like this to find it in, I always say pencils and paper clips, because it's just so little in the grand scheme of things. I think you also, if you're kind of look to try to play that game of knowing that things are going to be open or not, I think that just makes it tough for us to manage. And it would be better to say, these are the positions that we know you have, these are the ones you don't have. And kind of just handle that up front would be my recommendation, because I think as you can see, I know that you guys may have picked it up over time, but when you see a resignation from a support staff on there, you probably tend to notice a little number behind it. Like one of the things that Jess and I and Jason have worked on is that, because of the turnover and everything, and sometimes people will move from building to building based off needs, is that we're coding every position so that I know that of the 78 ed tech positions that are available in the district, we know which ones are open. And if 72 becomes open, like I believe it did tonight, that slides into a list on the bottom, and we can manage that. And I think we've been much more successful understanding what our openings and our needs are by doing something like that. So going back to something that was a little bit looser and could float a little bit would probably be something that we would suggest not to do, because we like having that ability to say, hey, I know what positions are open, I know what our needs are, and really my request would be to you guys to say, let's make a decision, and if we need to eliminate something, let's do that, because I feel like we're doing a much better job managing the resources that we have over time. Maybe even to a point where we again have some of that conversation of projecting with finance committee, okay, you have 2 years of having carryover amounts at around the $800,000 mark. Is that becoming more of a trend? Where do we, as we get to looking at the March expense report, are we trending in that same piece, knowing that we still probably have a lot of capital pieces that happened in that springtime and in June? And do we feel comfortable that, we've put $400,000 in carryover in this budget, because based off the last couple of years, we've been at 800, and I said, Jason, I think we can, help lower the tax rate and not have a reductions by, do we have a conversation of what another 50,000 looks like? We know that $50,000 or $60,000 is going to be about 0.25%. So I think those are some conversations that we can look at that may not just be cutting, but maybe the revenue side of the pieces.
Okay, anyone else? Yep, School Board Member Archie.
So I was wondering if I could pick on one of our principals. If I could have a Young or Fairfield principal come up. Thank you. I was just wondering if you could explain to me the technology coordinator position. I don't have a grasp of that.
The technology coach basically operates as the same as like a literacy coach or a math coach, where they go in and train teachers in how to like incorporate technology into literacy or math, and kind of in your daily kind of lessons, and maybe on the side do some coaching cycles.
Okay, so it was more on a faculty side than a
Yes.
classroom
Yeah,
side?
yeah, less.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anyone else? School Board Member Gale?
I guess just a couple questions. Just for clarification, on that student enrollment by grade level chart, there was the 2 red boxes for 10. Is that post the recommendations of the reduction? Yeah,
Yes, that's highlighting where those reductions occurred,
yeah,
and that the 10 would be there.
gotcha, okay. And then on the presentation on slide 9, where it says the cost per student, on the column student and staff support, why are we one of the lowest there? I guess what goes into that cost?
So again, when you look at what makes it very difficult for us in Saco versus my other world in Biddeford, is that when we pay that tuition payment, that captures all of those costs for a student, 9 through 12, which is, 12,000 something dollars that we're paying, and throws most of that into regular. That's why we have a regular. If you look at Saco, we're at 9,200. You look at Dayton, there's 10,000 there, and then you look at the statewide average, and it's 6,800. Some of those costs for student support services, if we were in a district that had the high school as part of their K-12 budget, would spread in that direction. So things like other instructional support, support staff and students, that's where some of the costs for, say, guidance, ed tech at the high school level would pull out of that regular instruction and move to there. Because when you look at your budget here, and you look at something like other support services, which would be social work or guidance, you'll see a code in the budget for the guidance counselor that would move under that line. Just like high school at Biddeford, I have that guidance counselor that's under that code, so when I report that up to the state, it's taking the whole system. Here, because of our high school students being tuitioned, what we report to the state is a tuition dollar under regular instruction, because that's the code they provide us for, and that's why you see that difference here. So it makes it much harder for you guys to compare yourself in some of those categories because of that.
And then just sticking on the slide here, just so I can, for my education, so $16,891 is the total average cost.
Correct.
Without the debt service and for each student. Mm-hmm. And then of that 16,000, the state share is let's say 50%, rounding up. And then our property taxes are paying for that.
Correct.
8,000, just to use round, it's just the $8,000, right?
You can roughly say that, and again, remember, just as a reminder, we're working off information from 22-23 budget.
Yeah.
But that's what they've released at year's end, so yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
In simplest forms, yes.
Yeah, exactly, just very simple form there. I guess following up on the technology coordinator question, with the reduction of that one, how many coordinators are we going to have available?
So we still would have one at the elementary level in grades 3 through 5. So we would have that situation there. And we still have our technology staff throughout the district. Again, looking at where we were budget-wise and having the conversations about where I thought we needed to at least come in first piece. So we had to make that tough decision, and after weighing some of the other, even though there is a position that's open, I think that we evaluated what that direct work with students is versus this one, and ultimately I had to make a recommendation to you guys, and you guys work through that piece.
And then the last question, just on the overall budget on slide 11, just wanted to ask, because it was one of the top ones, on the central office. Um, What, what was the change there? And I think last year we also had an increase too. So I was just curious as to what's driving that year-over-year increase.
I'd have to look at that. Some of that is because we are sharing more, and it's a contracted service, so it's pulling out of one place and being that piece. I'll get the information for you for the next meeting. Right. So
So could you,
when we shared we're sharing the data manager position now between the two districts. And so that data manager piece, part of that, that's just one of the items, that was falling under the technology budget. And now because it's a shared service and essentially it's saving us or equal to the same amount of money, that is a shared service so that it becomes a central office cost, not a technology share. That makes sense. We moved it from technology because you'd see the technology budget went down $80-some-odd thousand, and there's a shared cost there. You also have items, I believe there's an increase in lawyers' fees and some other things, but we can bring you a
Yeah.
breakdown.
okay, all right. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yep, School Board Member Archie?
I'm gonna make you flip slides again. Can we go back to the chart with all the other schools on it? Something that just kind of dawned on me is, so we have Fairfield and Burns that are Title I, correct?
Correct.
So with putting the two schools, or three schools together, would that hypothetically change that 49.93% in the future?
No,
Just out of
because,
curiosity?
no, because that 49.3% is your funding formula made up, straight up valuation and student count. So you're not gonna see any, by putting the schools together, the drivers are student counts and valuation, not Title I pieces or any of that coming into it. What will drive that number will be if you, yeah. It will not change that piece. Yeah.
School Board Member Roach?
Understanding that the schools are not entitled to whatever cash reserves they have, it's with the city, so you can't use that. But how that gets increased is things that are under budget, but also contingency as well. So I don't know what the rules are in terms of like if one section of one department goes over budget, like either you can't go over budget or you gotta shuffle things or?
So you continue to shuffle things if you had a major, from the 11 lines, theoretically, if you had a major increase like a boiler go, and you needed to end that now, because that would be more than 10% over a change in, say, that line, which, and again, in this situation, you might not even be at 10% based off the cost. You would have to work with the school committee and the city council in order to make that expenditure. Again, those are rules that are set by the state, but at the same time, you know, there are rules set by the state that a school department can't overspend their budgets, and we know that that's something that can happen. It's really a local control situation, Kevin, that you'd need to be mindful of.
What is, before the last year's budget, do you know what the contingency was the last three budgets before fiscal year 2024? It was 800,000 last year.
And again, the only reason that contingency was at 800,000 is because we were in the middle of negotiations, and we needed a place to
Park
think
that.
about money.
But you brought down to in the 600,000 range. But was it?
And the reason because we are dealing with, and the reason it's down is because we're working with smaller collective bargaining units. The teachers' unit obviously is much larger than the other piece. And if we had Jason, the year before that, when we were not in negotiation, did we even have anything in that contingency line? I think we operated at 0.
Okay.
Answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
School Board Member Gill?
I guess just following up on that and looking ahead to next year, do you anticipate, are we going to be bargaining or having a large contingency piece in there?
Well, we would have we'll be starting the second year. For the following year, we'll be on the second year of the teacher's contract, and then still have another year, and then hopefully have a successful support staff contract, so you wouldn't necessarily have that large contingency line. Again, just remember that in this situation, contingency line is nothing more than something that will filter out into the other pieces. I believe the other years when we haven't done that, we haven't said, oh, there's this much in contingency, because I kind of feel like if we're budgeting this way and we've got every item there and every staff member listed, we need to kind of operate within what we have. And if we have an emergency or a challenge that presents itself, just like when we had a motel become a residence, that was not something that was on our radar screen. But we were able to, if you remember those budget pieces, we were worried. And then as we worked with the state and we worked on getting different funds and we got true numbers and we looked at all of the things that we had in the district, we managed that throughout the year. So there was no need for that contingency piece. And, I hope for us to continue to do that, of not having to just say, oh yeah, there's $250,000 for the things that could come up. I'd rather think about and then continue to adjust and manage our budget throughout the year when those things come up. And then if we can't, we go back and we talk about the situation at hand at the board, and then we talk about that with the city council, because a community could experience a true emergency or something that, plan for. But that's probably, when it comes to that point, that probably should be a very open conversation. I do know that in Dayton, we operate with a contingency fund, because obviously that's a much tighter budget and a smaller number. But in that situation, we don't spend out of that fund unless we have a discussion and a board vote to spend out of that fund.
Actually, just one more question, sorry. So on the SMS positions and the recommendations on the classroom positions, so are these positions that we've had open for a year or more that have been unfilled, and we're talking about eliminating them, or are these positions that are filled?
So they're current positions,
Okay.
but they will be open at the end of the year based off person leaving or retirement.
Okay.
And when we look at the data for numbers, I think it is, in my opinion, fairly clear to look at what the class sizes would be. And if you were saying to me, Jeremy, what would you if we were going to have larger class sizes anywhere, or smaller class sizes, what would be the grade level you would pick? I probably would be looking more at first and second grade, or looking, I wish I had another room at Burns School. The other piece that's an interesting piece of data is, Meg, can you go back to the first sheet of the 279? I want to highlight something for them. So if you look at the first sheet of the 279 in that second square down, that lists all of the percentages of staff throughout your district and where they are based off state recommendation. And you'll see in the first line that, the state theoretically says that 1.0 is like the magic number. Well, we know that's not necessarily true. But obviously, we look at this situation, and we're at .83, which means in the eyes of the state, the ratio is higher than what would be part of the essential program of service formula. When you run those numbers of classroom teachers, that includes your UA teachers, specialists across the district, you will look at our 1 through 5 schools operating at a level of about 102%, which says that they're a little bit more efficient than as a district, than the .83. So they're kind of running right at what the number is. When you look at our number for Saco Middle School, again, based off UAs, and some of this is to be expected at a middle school or a high school level, but that number is about 72%. So when you look at the spread and you look at the numbers, or you look at the recommendations, that I would come to you as a superintendent and say, it would be very difficult for me to recommend a reduction in an area where the math shows me that we're operating super efficiently and towards the formula, versus an area where the math or the recommendations is so skewed to why we're, why we're at .83. Because we know where the concentration of staff in the district are and the per pupil ratios. If you look at that building, it's about 12 to 1 for student to staff ratios, when our other buildings are more in the 16 to 1 level. No, that's currently, but with our current situations, where we would be at .72 at the middle school.
So could we move those two positions to, say, 5th grade, to then reduce the percentage?
If you can get me a classroom, we could. I mean, that's not, I'm not joking on that. Yeah. We don't have a classroom at Burns School right now to accommodate that, unless we're asking a teacher to teach off a cart. Again, the other piece that we looked at too, and we can provide information, is we try to look at similar communities and class size, and where are you in a band. And one of the things you guys don't have here in the district, which I'll be asking you guys to do during policy committee, is you don't have a class size recommendation policy that I can find anywhere, whereas many of the other surrounding districts do. And Meg would be able to bring that piece forward, is what are your recommendations on class size, knowing that you have ebbs and flows, but you also have just the piece of got to have a classroom to put them in. I had a conversation with Gorham School Department. Their elementary classrooms in Gorham are about 23 to 25 students per classroom, and their middle school is upwards of 27 per classroom. They have 9 teachers at their middle school for like 270 students in there. And so certainly we could look at what the ratios are locally, what those policies from other districts, we kind of looked at those. But some of it is mechanically driven of just the space that you have, while at the same time looking at a situation of being conscious of the tax rate. Same time, I'll also tell you that I have a belief of when the numbers leads us in one direction that says, here's what class size and looks like, I believe that we program that way, so that if I came back to you and said, we can't do 24 to 1, that city council, public knows that we're willing to look at the data that's in front of us and lead us into the direction of what we need to make or match our policy or our convictions on what class size would be. And so that would be part of that piece.
Anyone else? School Board Member Archie?
Really quick, under SMS, the elementary co-curricular, what is that group?
So that would be all of your stipend positions.
Okay, I was just looking at the supplies, and that's almost a $17,000 increase. I was just
And I believe, and I believe on that one, there may be some uniforms or something that's sticked in that one. We had a conversation about that, but I'll double check.
And again, you'll get to ask Marie all about that one next week. So Finance Committee next week on the 7th, and certainly everyone's willing to attend that meeting, is when principals will get to come up and go through that piece. That is the hope, is that it's right here. All right. Certainly, if you have questions beforehand that you need answers, you can certainly shoot them that way so we make sure that we have the materials ready for that.
Okay, any others? Okay, moving on. That takes us to item C, first reading of the policy. There are 26 listed policies. Is there a motion to approve?
Madam Mayor,
School Board Member Johnston?
I'm going to make the motion for these 26 policies, but thank you for mentioning that there are quite a few of them, so I hope everyone will bear with me as we go through this. I move we approve the first reading of policies JEAA, Student Attendance Administrative Regulation, JFABD, Admission of Homeless Students, JFABD-R, Education of Homeless Students Administrative Procedure, JHB, Truancy, JHB-R, Truancy Administrative Procedures, JI, Student Rights and Responsibilities, JICC, Student Conduct on School Buses, JICH, Drug and Alcohol Use by Students, JICJ, Student Use of Cell Phones and Other Electronic Devices, JICK, Bullying, JICK-R, Bullying Administrative Procedure, JICK-E1, Bullying Report Form, JICK-E2, Bullying Investigation Form, JICK-E3, Documentation of Disciplinary and Remedial Actions Taken, JJE-R, Student Fundraising Guidelines, JJI, Philosophy of Athletics, JJIF, Management of Concussions and Other Head Injuries, JJIF-R, Academic Expectations During Post-Concussion Recovery, JKE-R, Expulsion Guidelines, JLCC, Communicable/Infectious Disease, JLCD-R, Medication Administration on School Field Trips, JLCE, First Aid and Emergency Medical Care, JLDBG, Reintegration of Students from Juvenile Correctional Facilities, JLDBG-R, Reintegration of Students from Juvenile Correctional Facilities, Administrative Procedures, JRA, Student Educational Records and Information, and JRA-E, Annual Notice of Student Education Records and Information Rights.
Second.
Good job.
You gotta list all those off when you second, you know.
And second has been made by School Board Member Truman. Any questions or discussions on any of the policies?
Madam Mayor,
School Board Member Johnston?
I just wanted to say that we've accomplished a lot in the last couple of these meetings, and it was the request of the committee to our assistant superintendent that we try to cover as much of the bases as we could so we move ourselves along, because this is an ongoing process always, but we like to get to a certain point where we feel like we've accomplished a certain level. So a lot of these policies are policies that the MSMA had suggested to us were in pretty good shape, and we didn't have to do a lot to examine them. We did go through all of them, of course, and check them out, but we did not do a lot of debating and trying to make a lot of changes on them. But, so I think these are all in pretty good shape, but I just wanted to say that we have made, you know, a stretch of accomplishment here. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate all the work. And again, the housekeeping stuff is what takes the time, get the quick stuff out of the way, and then Can focus on the larger stuff. Okay, anyone else? Roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
School Board Member Roach?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Okay, that takes us to item 13. Is there any additional information? Okay, not seeing any. Item 14, there is no executive session this evening. And item 15, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by School Board Member Truman, second by School Board Member Preble. Roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
School Board Member Roach?
Here comes sunshine, Jeremy. Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn passes 7-0 at 6:32. Thank you, everyone.